before the soldier.
Now someone wants to own him.
I wanna be with you.
Dawn came into room 4B the way bad news comes. Gray, and already in the room before you wake. Marcus Thorne knelt on the cold linoleum with the photograph in both hands and did not move. Behind him, the bed springs shifted. Devon was awake. Devon had been awake, Marcus understood, for longer than he was pretending. Marcus. Devon's voice had none of its Atlanta music in it. What's in your hands? It was not a question, because Devon never asked questions he already knew the answer to. Marcus turned the photograph face down against his chest, the oldest reflex he had, protect the evidence. And Devon watched him do it, and something in his broad, warm face closed like a door. Practice was the only church Marcus still trusted. On the field, the loads were honest, and the collisions were legal, and nothing wanted anything from him that a body couldn't pay. He ran his routes clean, the wide receiver with the softest hands on Howard's roster, and for 90 minutes the photograph did not exist. When the coach barked the wrong man's name for a blown assignment, it was Devon, linebacker's shoulders, Bison Navy, who stepped into the gap and took a blame that wasn't his. He didn't look at Marcus when he did it. That was the tell. The locker room emptied the way it always did. Loud, then less, then the particular echo of a tiled room with 2 men left in it. Steam hung in the fluorescent light. Marcus sat on the bench half out of his pads, and Devon, 3 lockers down, took longer than he needed to unlace his cleats. They had shared this room for 11 weeks. They had shared the dorm for 11 weeks. There was a third thing they had shared once, at 2 in the morning, that neither of them had named since. And it was in the room now, sitting between them like a third man nobody had introduced. "You walk slow again," Devon said finally, not turning around. "On the field, you're fast. Everywhere else, you've been walking like a man carrying a piano up a staircase." Marcus said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Devon set his cleats down, squared his shoulders, and for 1 second looked like he might cross the 3 lockers between them. Then he didn't. He pulled his gray hoodie over his head, the smell of dryer sheets and cornmeal and something steadier than either, and said, to the wall, "Whenever you ready, I'm not going anywhere." It was the kindest threat Marcus had ever been handed. Back in the dorm, alone, Marcus laid the photograph on the desk and turned it over to the handwriting he already knew by heart. "Some records cannot be unmade, Mr. Thorne. Sunday, my office. We will discuss the terms of your discretion." He read it the way he read a failing blueprint, looking for the load that would bring it down. The photograph was not about him. He could survive being seen. The figure in the Navy uniform with the trembling hand could not. Vaughn had not photographed a kiss. He had photographed a leash and handed Marcus the other end. He took the bus to U Street because the bus had no corners to decide in. The November cold had teeth now. He told himself he was going to warn Julian, and that was true. And he told himself that was the only reason, and that was not. Some part of him needed to stand in the one room where his own silence had finally been allowed to set something down. He did not yet know how he would warn a man without telling him the thing that would frighten him most, that a stranger now owned a photograph of his trembling hand, lifted half an inch toward a sleeve. The iron stairs, the single red bulb, the warm amber rising to meet him. The velvet underground took him in the way it always did, without asking what he'd brought. Cleon was on the stage, the old trumpet player with hands like cracked riverbeds, pulling a long, low note out of the brass that made the whole vaulted room lean toward him. And at the curve of the bar, in a plain dark sweater instead of the uniform, sat Julian, off-duty, watchful, his hands not yet still. He saw Marcus on the stairs, and something in his trained face came undone, just slightly, the way a fist comes undone. Marcus sat one stool away and then, deliberately, moved to the next. The 8 inches he had measured so carefully in the studio meant something different here. "You came back," Julian said. "I keep coming back," Marcus said, and meant it as a confession. He wanted to say, "A man has a picture of us, and he will use you to own me." He looked at Julian's hands, finally steady around the glass, steadied by nothing but the room and Marcus's nearness, and he could not do it. He chose the lie of omission, the architect's favorite material. He let Julian have one more night unafraid. Devon was idling at the curb in the borrowed Buick when Marcus came up the iron stairs into the cold. Devon, who had not been asked, who had simply known where Marcus would go and gone to bring him home. They drove in a silence that had weight now. Streetlights ran across the windshield like passing years. "The soldier," Devon said at last, not a question. "Yeah." Devon nodded slowly, both wrists draped over the wheel, and Marcus watched his friend's jaw work around something he had clearly decided weeks ago that he was going to say tonight whether the world was ready or not. Room 4B at 1 in the morning, a single bar of streetlight across the floor. Devon did not turn on the lamp. He sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, and for once the easy Atlanta grin was nowhere on him. "I held you," he said, "in September. The night you came in looking like the inside of a collapsed building. I held you, and you let me. And then the next morning we both acted like it was the catfish grease talking." Marcus stood very still inside the doorway. The oldest posture he owned. The one that kept buildings and feelings from moving. "I'm not saying it to make you owe me something," Devon went on. "I'm saying it because I watched you walk down some iron stairs tonight toward a man in a uniform, and I realized I've been waiting 11 weeks for you to walk toward me like that, and you're not going to." He said it without bitterness, which made it worse. "I held you first, Marcus. I just don't think I'm the one who gets to keep you." The radiator ticked. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. Marcus understood he was being handed the truest thing anyone at Howard had offered him, and that he could not give it back in kind. He made himself speak, which for Marcus was its own structural event. "You held me when I didn't know I was falling," he said. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what that was." Devon waited, generous even now. "But my hands are full of men who frighten me," Marcus said. "One who wants to own me. One who's going to lose everything just for sitting next to me. And you're the only one who never scared me at all. And I think that's exactly why I can't." It was the most honest engineering he had ever done, and it cost him a wall he would have to rebuild somewhere else. Devon took it the way he took everything, without flinching, without rushing to fill the silence, letting it sit until it stopped being unbearable and started being true. "Okay," he said at last. "Just that. He lay back on his bed and laced his hands behind his head and stared at the ceiling, and after a while he said, into the dark, "He better be good to you, the soldier, or I'm a linebacker and I know where U Street is." And Marcus, against every blueprint, laughed, one quiet broken sound, and felt a wall he'd always needed turned somehow into a door. He did not sleep. He lay in the dark and let himself go back just once to September, the rain, the first week, the homesickness he'd had no name for because he'd never had a home loose enough to miss. He had come in soaked and shaking, and Devon had not asked a single question. Devon had just crossed the room and put his arms around him the way you hold something that is about to come apart, and held on until it didn't. The first hands to reach him in months. Marcus had spent every week since pretending he didn't remember the exact temperature of being held. Monday, the studio. Vaughn was already there when Marcus arrived, jacket off, sleeves never rolled, a single fountain pen laid parallel to the table's edge like a flag planted on territory. "You look tired, Mr. Thorne," he said, not looking up. "Late nights are the price of relevance." Or a pause, engineered to the millimeter, of indiscretion. The black pepper and patchouli and old money hung in the air. Marcus set down his drafting tube and understood that the man already knew about the bus, the bar, the stairs. Vaughn did not need to watch him. He had taught Marcus to watch himself. "Sunday," Vaughn said, finally looking up, his calculating eyes mild as weather. "My office. I think you'll find the terms generous." He circled slowly behind Marcus's shoulder, the way a man inspects a structure he intends to buy. "A fellowship. My name behind yours for a decade. Everything your father's silence could not give you." He let the cruelty of that land softly. "In exchange for very little. Discretion, distance, a photograph that stays in a drawer." Marcus kept his pencil moving, his line clean, his face a sealed wall. And inside, for the first time, he began to draw a structure of his own. Saturday came first, and with it the one honest violence left to him. The stadium under a flat white sky, the band, the navy, and the red, the legal collisions he could give his whole grief to. Marcus ran his routes like prayers, and every time the pocket collapsed, every time a body came for him from the blind side, it was Devon who was there. Linebacker's build turned bodyguard, putting himself between Marcus and the hit without being asked, the way he had put himself between Marcus and everything since September. Out here, the protection had a name and a number. It was the only place Devon was still allowed to keep him. Fourth quarter, the ball in the air, and for one suspended second, Marcus was nothing but hands and flight. No photograph, no Sunday, no men in the dark with fountain pens. He came down with it in bounds, and the stadium made a sound like the inside of his own chest. When he turned, Devon was already there, helmet off, grinning the old Atlanta grin for the first time in days. And for that 1 second, the thing between them was simple again. Two teammates, one honest game, the loads all legal and all carried. Up in the stands, unseen, a man in a charcoal coat was not watching the ball. The locker room after a win is a kind of joy Marcus never learned how to join. Music, steam, bodies colliding in celebration. He sat half-dressed at the edge of it, apart as always, and across the loud, bright room, Devon caught his eye and lifted his chin. The same small, encouraging gesture from the jazz club, the one that said, "I see you," all the way over there. Nothing had been fixed between them. Devon had been refused, and they both knew it. And still he chose, again, to be glad in Marcus's direction. Marcus thought, this is what a foundation is. Not the thing you build, the thing that keeps standing after. That night, Marcus took out the small black and gold matchbook Julian had pressed into his palm outside the club, the one with a phone number written inside the flap in a careful, disciplined hand. He held it for a long time. A matchbook was a small thing to set against a general, a professor, a photograph. But it was the only door Julian had given him, and Marcus had learned this autumn that the smallest openings were the only ones that ever mattered. He did not call it yet. He laid it in the drawer beside the brass key, where the dangerous and the precious had learned to keep each other company. He found Julian the next evening at the edge of campus, between the ROTC building and the dark, where a cadet could be seen talking to another man without it meaning anything yet. "There's something I have to tell you," Marcus said, and got that far, and watched Julian's trained eyes go to the exits out of pure habit, and lost his nerve at the cliff edge of it. "Be careful who sees you," he said instead. "That's all." Julian almost smiled. "I've been careful my whole life," he said. "It's the one thing I'm good at." And Marcus thought, not careful enough. Not against this. He understood the shape of the danger because he had seen the man who made it. He had watched, weeks ago, General Vance Sterling walk a parade ground and stop in front of his own son, and he had watched Julian go past attention into the specific stillness of a boy holding himself motionless so his father would find nothing to correct. A general who could do that to his son in public would do anything about a photograph in private. Vaughn did not even need to release it. He only needed Julian's father to be exactly who he already was. The cage did not require new bars. It required only the world as it already stood. Devon found him on the steps of Drew Hall the next morning. 2 coffees, no questions. "I've been thinking," Devon said, "about the man with the picture." Marcus had told him almost nothing. Devon had assembled the rest the way he assembled a body's diagnosis from symptoms. "I can't make him give it back," Devon said. "But I can be the thing in the room he didn't count on. You don't walk into that office Sunday by yourself, you hear me? You don't have to keep the silence alone. That's the part nobody ever taught you." He pressed the coffee into Marcus's hands. "Drink. You look like a collapsed building again." Saturday night, Marcus sat on the floor of room 4B with his back against the bed frame and did the only honest engineering he knew. He drew the load path of the thing, Vaughn at the top holding the photograph, the fellowship, the future. Julian at the bottom, bearing all of it, a young man who would break under a weight he didn't know was on him. And himself in the middle. The span between them, the part of every structure that decides whether the load reaches the ground or brings the whole thing down. He could sign and keep Julian safe by disappearing into Vaughn's name, or he could refuse and learn what refusal costs. He pulled his father's trumpet case out from under the bed and set it across his knees, the way he had the night everything started. He still had not opened it. His father had kept his grief sealed in brass and silence and passed both down without a word, and Marcus had inherited the silence like a mortgage. He pressed his thumbs against the 2 latches and did not open them. Not yet. But he understood, sitting there, that every man in this story was holding something shut, Julian his fear, Vaughn his hunger, Devon his hurt, and Marcus the one case that might tell him who he was supposed to become. He went to the Velvet Underground one last time before Sunday. Julian was at the same stool, and the 8 inches were gone now, the two of them shoulder to shoulder, while Cleon played and Miss Odessa sang something slow about leaving. Under the lip of the bar, where no one could see, Marcus laid 2 fingers across the back of Julian's hand and stilled the tremble that lived there. Neither of them looked at the other. Both of them looked at the trumpet. It was the most either of them had ever said out loud, and the room, the one room that listened, kept it, the way it kept everything, in the dark, off the record. Sunday morning, Devon was up before him, dressed, sitting on his own bed with his forearms on his knees, watching Marcus knot a dark tie like a man preparing for a sentencing. "I'll drive you," Devon said. "I'll be outside the whole time. You walk out that office on your own 2 feet. We go get catfish. You don't walk out in 20 minutes. I'm coming up those stairs, and I don't care whose 3-piece suit is in the way." Marcus looked at his roommate, his teammate, the first hands that ever held him, the love. He could not return and had not lost. "Okay," he said. It was a whole language in one word. Vaughn's office was on the top floor, behind a heavy door of old oak, and the Venetian blinds laid parallel bars of cold gold light across the rug like a cell drawn in advance. Vaughn sat behind the vast leather-topped desk with the leather folder squared to the edge, and, beside it, face up, the photograph. 2 figures on a night sidewalk, a trembling hand lifted toward a sleeve. "Mr. Thorne," Vaughn said, and gestured to the single chair with the surgical elegance of a man who had never been told no in a room he chose to enter. "Sit. Let's discuss the terms of your discretion." Marcus stepped inside, and the bars of light fell across him. He did not sit. That was the first thing. A small refusal, but Vaughn's eyes registered it the way a seismograph registers the tremor before the quake. "You photographed his hand," Marcus said quietly, "not mine. You knew I'd survive being seen. You went looking for the one of us who wouldn't." Vaughn smiled, unhurried, and folded his fine hands. "I went looking," he said, "for what you love. It is always the load-bearing wall, Mr. Thorne. You, of all people, should know what happens when you take it out." Outside, in the cold, a linebacker leaned against a borrowed Buick and watched the top-floor window. And Marcus Thorne, 18 years old, opened his mouth to say the most expensive word he owned.